Our best changes from moment to moment, but if you're always giving your best, you will never disappoint yourself, you'll never have to judge yourself, and you will never have to disappoint other people or have other people judge you either. I learned this many years ago when I was 11 years old, and I was reminded of it just a few years ago when I went home to England. Because my mother, I don't know why mothers do this, she kept all my report cards. It's insane, especially when you look at my report cards, it's especially insane. And she said, darling, she always calls me darling, darling, I thought you would want these. Why would I want them? So actually, I did want them, because they're hilarious. It's funny to look at 11-year-old you and then see yourself through different kinds of eyes. And so when she presented them to me, my brothers and sisters were there, and we just laughed and laughed. And I think the one that we laughed most at was the fact that I got 48% in needlepoint. Now, I'm just trying to imagine, how do you decide what 48% is as opposed to 50%? Why was I 2% below passing when all I did was cross-stitch? I mean, come on. But what made it even more insulting than the 48% was the teacher wrote next to it, because they always have a comment box, right? And I was like the good girl. So it had, Heather tried so very hard. We appreciate her effort. And I'm thinking, what kind of effort gets you 48%? And then a commendation from the teacher. But actually, even though I got 48%, I could be proud on some level, right? Because I did my best. Obviously, I did my best. My teacher told me that I did my best. I can't actually remember it. But what's important in life is that when we're always putting our best foot forward, we're always investing, then we'll actually never have to judge ourselves or feel judged by someone else. And we can always find God, because honestly, God is there in our effort. Now, I was reading in a book yesterday the story of a Buddhist monk. And a Buddhist monk was visited by a young man. And this young man said, I want to overcome suffering. I want to be able to transcend suffering. Can you help me? And so the Buddhist monk said, well, what are you going to do? And he said, I want to go into the mountains and I want to meditate for 4 hours a day. So if I meditate for 4 hours a day, how long will it take me to transcend my suffering? And so the monk reflected for a moment and he said, maybe 10 years. So the guy goes, okay, I can do this. And he said, but if instead of meditating for 4 hours a day, what if I ramped it up and I meditated for 8 hours a day? Then how long would it take me to transcend my suffering? And so the monk reflected again, and he said, maybe 20 years. And the guy, but why? I'm investing more effort. Why would it take more time? And he said, well, actually, because you would lose the point of your meditation. And I thought, how often in our life of faith do we overdo it? We make these long conditions. Maybe we offer a prayer condition, or we decide to study, or we decide to fast. I haven't decided that for a long time, by the way. But whatever it is that we decide to do to make our offering, then we invest in that and we get lost in that effort instead of thinking about what's the purpose behind the sacrifice. What's the purpose behind the effort? Because the purpose behind the effort surely is to transcend, is to find God. But if we get so wrapped up in our offering, we forget what the goal is. We grow tired and miss the point. And this Buddhist monk said those words, and they just really resonated with me. They grow tired and miss the point. And I thought, how many times have I made an offering, but because I'm focused on the wrong thing, I grow tired and miss the point. It's easy to do. So we have to really, more is not always better. I don't know whether you've seen that TV ad for I think it says T-Mobile, right? And there's this telephone guy, this phone guy, and he's sitting with a bunch of kindergartners, and he's engaging with them, and he's always trying to convince them, more is better, right, guys? You get this. And then all the little kindergartners go, yeah, bigger is better, right? But actually, more isn't always better. We have to think about why we're doing it. Is 20 hours of prayer better than 2 hours of prayer? We have to think about that. And ultimately, the offering that we make isn't about the time period, but it's actually about creating spiritual memory, or spiritual muscle memory in a way. You've all heard of the concept of muscle memory, right? I see it a lot in my life right now because I type so much that I realize my fingers kind of like float above the keys, and like all of a sudden I've written like several sentences and I'm hardly aware of what I'm doing. And if I stop to think about it, it completely all goes wrong and I mess up. That's because I have muscle memory now in my fingers that just know where all the keys on a typewriter. I'm not a typewriter. Oh, bad. On a computer keyboard. And some memories don't go away. And,
you really got me.
That's right, I do have memory. But, you know, with muscle memory, then you actually end up being able to do it with ease without even any kind of effort. And we've all experienced that in terms of learning to ride a bike, right? I imagine everybody here at some point or other learned to ride a bike. And in learning to ride that bike, you develop muscle memory. So you could not ride a bike for 10 years, and you get on it, and you can still ride it. You can balance it, even though you're balanced on this like tiny, tiny wheel that almost, you know, has no connection with the ground. But because you know how to balance your body with all that muscle memory, you can just do it without effort. And in one sense, that's the kind of effort that we have to make in our spiritual lives. We have to make the kind of effort where we can actually connect to God without even thinking about it. Wouldn't you prefer that way of connecting to God than coming to church endlessly? Although that does help you. Wouldn't you rather connect to God like that than like, you know, praying for hours on end? But slowly over time, you build up the spiritual muscle memory, if you like, that you can just connect to God naturally and easily in any moment. Now, I don't know whether you've ever watched the Tour de France. They practice, and they practice, and they practice. And I was listening about it on NPR, and they were explaining that the guy is all about helping the guy in front. It's very interesting, because they have actual people on the team who never intend to win, because their job is what they call spotters. And the job of spotters is to go up front, to take some of the wind resistance, to provide this kind of draft behind them, whereby the actual person who's going to win kind of gets sucked along, so they don't have to make as much effort. And then those guys at the front drop back, and they drop back to the very back where there's a car with water bottles. Because actually, as you're riding along in the Tour de France, you need tons of water, as you can imagine, in all that kind of physical effort. And so the spotters get the water, and then they ride up to the person who they anticipate will be the winner, and they give him the water. And then they take, you know, the guys just throw the water. I guess someone comes behind them and picks up all the empty bottles. But these spotters are just, you know, in one sense, sacrificing their opportunity to be the winner by being the spotter. But you can't actually be the winner without the spotters. But there's all this kind of training that goes into it. And that's the point that the young Jewish man brought out in the video, didn't he? Because he said, you know, now, because of all that teaching my parents did, now I automatically start to think about living for others. I think about living with integrity. I automatically want to give. I want to do these things because it's within me. It's part of my makeup. He said it's part of my DNA. So in one sense, our training in life, which starts in childhood, gives us that kind of spiritual DNA that we can live a life together with God, investing our best. You know, if you think about a young child, nobody would expect a young child to be born, to be a year old, and to be able to read. Although I think baby Einstein thinks that's possible, I don't know. You know, the sad reality is those videos actually don't do a lot. But people think they do, so they buy them because they want their child to be able to learn easily and read early, etc. But we know that a child can't actually learn to read until they've invested the training in learning how to decode the letters, the sounds of the letters, and to be able to put it all together to make words and to be able to read. So why do we shy away from the fact that we need to put that much effort, in one sense, into our spiritual lives? We expect that somehow we'll just be able to magically find God. If God exists one day, he's just going to appear before me and I'm just going to know. But actually it doesn't work like that because we have to train ourselves. We have to train our sensitivity. Just like you have to train your sensitivity to be able to read, you need to train your sensitivity in order to be able to actually find God. And in the Bible it talks about this, and there are a couple of Bible verses I wanted to focus on this morning. It says, "Don't you know that you are God's temple and God's Spirit dwells within you?" That's from 1 Corinthians 3:16. And the question is, do you know that? And the answer is, most of the time, no. Right? How many times a day do you really have that self-awareness? Actually, I'm God's temple and God is dwelling in me. And I have that kind of experience and feeling and relationship with God. Or even better, how much do you experience that in other people? I don't know if you've been down to the new Market Basket on Elm Street. It's the biggest market basket in the world, maybe. Certainly in New England. It's like huge. And it has everything in there. And no matter what time of day you go into this market basket, there's people from all over the world. And that's partly because of its geographic location in Manchester. But there's people from Africa, from Asia. You can buy just about any kind of food in there, which isn't unusual for a market basket if you know the history of market basket in New England, right? And it's an incredible store, and sometimes I walk around it, and Phil sometimes says to me, "Well, how come you forgot to pick up this at Market Basket and pick up that?" And it's because like my mind wasn't there. Because I'm walking around Market Basket thinking, wow, all these different people here. But actually God is inside each and every person. How much am I experiencing that? How much do I know that? And in one sense, creating that spiritual muscle memory is about developing that ability within yourself to know that God is in you and that God is in each and every person. Because if you know that, you treat yourself differently and you treat other people differently. And the second Bible verse I want to talk about today is in Thessalonians, where Paul was saying, pray without ceasing. So does that mean he's the 20-hour-a-day prayer man or the guy that prays too much? How can you pray without ceasing except that you're not on your hands and knees praying, but it's about where your mind is at. It's about what you're experiencing. It's about connecting to God in a very natural way. There's not a formal prayer, but you're walking around with an awareness that God is with you. That's very different. Prayer without ceasing is that kind of experience. And that's the experience that, St. Paul was really guiding people toward. And that's the kind of experience that spiritual training is developing you toward. They've done all these experiments with people who meditate a lot. And they've even found that their brains are sort of morphed through that experience because they're developing that awareness. And that awareness isn't with them in the moment of meditation, but that awareness transfers into the rest of their life all the time. If we really want to live with God, finding God in our best, then that's the kind of awareness that we're trying to create. I want to read a little bit from a sermon that was given by Reverend Moon called How to Gain Spiritual Health. Why does a handkerchief owned by a holy man become so valuable? Because of the vibration of the holy man. So you too should give all things, a holy value. When touching something, feel that you are giving it glory. The same holds true for the people we meet and live with. When you see another person, how much do you care for him or her? How do you feel towards that person? You must really love the people you meet because they are temples of God. When you touch another person, feel that through your touch, both of you will be blessed. Each of us has two aspects, mind and body. Our true mind wants to touch our body with heart and give love to it. We should think of our mind as God's mind because God loves it and that is where he dwells. Look at each man or woman as a holy person. Regard each person's body as sacred and their mind as hallowed. Can you imagine the kind of culture that we could live in if we could just create that world? We could actually transform our culture from the present culture into something that could always be beautiful, that could always be its best in one sense. So the key word for this kind of life is respect. And I think that's what that young Jewish man in the video had. He had respect for himself, and he had respect for others. And where did he get that? Actually, he got it from his parents as a child. Respect all things as holy things. Respect all men as holy men and women as holy women. Respect yourself as a holy person. Respect your mind as holy. Respect your body as holy. Pay deep respect to all people, no matter what kind of person he or she may be. So when we respect our mind and our bodies as holy, our lives as holy, then it changes what we allow to come into ourselves. It changes, what we consider to be okay in one sense. As a child, be respectful toward an elderly man. Think over your words 3 times before uttering them. That's a good one. Think over your words 3 times before uttering them, and always have a humble attitude. Always share with others the best thing that you have. Empty your pocketbook to give. Leave behind something that God can praise. Each moment is so precious, there is no time for worry or frustration. The person who recognizes that earthly life is short compared to eternity, and therefore condenses his accomplishment, is a wise man indeed. Think about the label you wear spiritually on your forehead. Ask yourself, how many people, how many clans or tribes, or how many nations have you loved? Seek to become the master of love. Program your life like that, and you will never be a loser. So actually, Reverend Moon was talking about finding God in your best, giving your best, and then finding God in your life in that way. This lifestyle creates a spiritual memory in your life so that you can begin to unconsciously live with God. So God isn't some big effort you have to make. Oh, I have to remember that, God exists and, I should pray this morning. But you're just living naturally every day with God because you're always training your mind and your heart toward that point so that it becomes naturally. If you think any famous cyclist or someone who's really good at something, after a while it just becomes automatic. And if you stop to think about it, you cease to be able to do it because you lose the ability. Just like, when I think too much about the letters I'm typing, I forget where they are. But if I just allow my mind to find them, then I do it naturally. So when you're doing your best, you're going to be happy, right? So you do your best, you're always taking action. You're not a victim of your circumstance because you're always initiating. So doing your best is about initiating. So in needlepoint, somehow, someone thought I was doing my best. And it's sad. Maybe I was. But, many times we do the things we do because of some reward that's been, offered to us. So that's why we go to work each week. We go to work for the reward of the paycheck. But if the only reward is the paycheck, that's not enough, right? Or it becomes not enough. Because we need the paycheck, and honestly that's a responsible thing to do, is to take care of your family, to pay the rent, to, buy the food. But if that's all that you're investing for the reward of that paycheck, then actually it's not enough, and also it leaves you with a somewhat empty feeling. I want to tell you the story of a lady. And many years ago, I used to work on some international conferences with her and others. And we would bring in these big-name speakers, very famous people, and Cynthia would help me with hospitality. She's an incredible lady. She's just so sophisticated and serene, and she just does such a great job, and everyone was always impressed with her. And there's one speaker in particular I got to know well over time. And one day she said to me, so what does Cynthia do for a living? And I said, oh, she has a part-time job at Shaw's, the supermarket. And you could see the woman, this famous person immediately go, like that, because somehow it wasn't good enough. And I go, actually, Cynthia is an incredible cashier. And this is not Cynthia, obviously. But this man in this picture is doing what Cynthia did every time someone went through her cash out. She said, I made it my goal to have eye contact with that person because I wanted them to experience God through me. I knew that I was here in this Shaw's supermarket working in my part-time job because honestly I need some money every month. But what I want to do is I want to bring God's presence into someone's life. I want to be there for them. I don't know what they need, but I trust if I can make eye contact with them, maybe something can happen. They can feel something, that they can experience or receive something. And she made that her goal, and she did it each and every day. Not just sometimes, but with every customer. And I swear that it was that kind of spiritual training that enabled her to excel in the job that she did, which, perhaps one could say is more important. Like she would be able to take care of these high-level VIP people with such heart and sincerity and compassion and love that they could feel something from her, to the extent that everyone asked, who is that woman? Where did you find that volunteer? She's so amazing. Why is she amazing? Because she trained herself with sincerity each and every day. And to me that was so powerful, because she took what one might consider a low-end job that other people could look down on, but she knew that by doing her best and giving her best, she could find God in giving her best. And she did find God, but more importantly, other people found God. Because each and every person that went through that checkout aisle was loved by her. And so it's incredible when you think of that kind of training and offering. And this is another quote from a sermon given by Reverend Moon. It says, "You must learn and study how to generate your own power." Because Cynthia created her own power through that kind of offering. You must make yourself self-propelling. In order to do that, prayer must be the diet of your life. It's a beautiful quote. But what was more beautiful to me than this quote was seeing someone who lived this quote, who was actually embodying the idea behind this quote and giving herself in that way. And there's another person that I want to talk about in closing the sermon today, and that is Will Turner from Pirates of the Caribbean. Now, I don't know if everybody's seen Pirates of the Caribbean. I always kind of like thumb my nose at it, which was maybe wrong, because there was a beautiful message in it, as there often is in movies. And so Will Turner was a pirate. He didn't know he was a pirate, but he was a humble blacksmith. But ever since he'd been saved by the governor's daughter, he loved the governor's daughter and wanted to be with the governor's daughter. But he never had any hope. Meanwhile, though, he invested himself in creating the most incredible swords that this tiny island had seen. And one day he presented this sword, which you can't really see because of the darkness, I'm sorry, but he presented this sword to the governor that he had just made. And there's this image of him, and he's balancing it. He's able to balance it on his finger because the sword is so well balanced, because it's so incredibly well made. And this was his pride and what he was known for. But really his heart is to have the governor's daughter, to be with the governor's daughter. Meanwhile, of course, there's somebody else always who wants the governor's daughter. And that is the Commodore. And the Commodore has all the right qualifications. He's a Commodore, he runs a ship, he has social standing, he has a white wig that tells everybody that he's important. And so he wants the Commodore's daughter. But eventually, of course, Will Turner gets the girl. There's a lot of sword fighting in the meantime. But Will Turner gets the girl. And what's amazing, and I thought, the Commodore would be the typical, mean guy and not be happy. But when he realized that he wasn't going to win the girl, he turned to Will Turner and he said, "I hope you better invest yourself to the same degree in your spouse and family that you have invested in making these quality swords." I thought that was so profound, because actually the Commodore did love the girl, and he wanted the girl to be taken well care of. And he said, if you can make swords like that, if you have such fine craftsmanship, and you invest so much in your craftsmanship and in your career, can you invest as much in the person you love and in your future family? And actually that's the same message God spoke through the Pirates of the Caribbean. That is the same message that God has for each one of us. Because I know that today I'm in a room of very talented people who invest a lot in their careers, who invest a lot in their hobbies, who invest a lot in the talents that God has given you. But God's question for you this morning is, can you invest as much in the people you love, in your spouse, in your family, as you invest in your career or in your craft? So this week, think about finding God in your best. You don't have to be a straight A student. Sometimes 48% is enough. Hey, I'm a successful person, right? But 48% is enough if you've given your best. Because when you give your best, you will find God in your best. God will find you, and others will experience God with you. So let's think about, we should all send an email to Cynthia Myers this week and say thank you. But let's live our lives like that so that we can find God. Thank you very much. Let's invite up to the Master prayer.